Hi everyone, I wanted to make a video today to elaborate more on the Curve token, which was just released a few days ago. You might have seen my previous video, which was more focused on what the experience is of being a liquidity provider before the Curve token was launched and what was needed to do to kind of migrate over. And in that video, I was kind of trying to still get a handle on things and learn about what the Curve token is and the token economics behind it, and the whole Curve DAO, because there's a lot more than just the Curve token. Now I've had a little bit of time to kind of get a handle on things a little better, and I wanted to describe what this token does that I think is so interesting. I should say that, I was kind of inspired to want to elaborate on this because there's a lot of things that I see on social media where people are complaining about the prices dumping or the inflation is so high, and people are looking at this thing from a speculation perspective. Um, and I think that what we should be looking at it as is a tokenomics experiment, especially an experiment in governance. I think that the Curve team have hit on something that nobody has done yet. Some other teams have kind of uh, I would say the Curve team has absorbed some of the great ideas of some of these other teams. One of which is this idea of liquidity mining, which has kind of gotten a bad rap at this point. A lot of people are calling it kind of degenerate behavior, but I think that there's merit to the concept. I think that in time, the curve mechanics will prove themselves to not be a degenerate activity, but to be a really integral part of um, creating an application that has staying power, that strengthens over time, that incentivizes its users to be active in the governance process. All these things that I think, like, I'm excited about sustainability, because in crypto we're so focused on innovation and the next hot thing. Um, if oops, if we focus instead on finding these ideas that straddle the line between innovation and sustainability, that's the money spot, in my opinion, and that's what makes me so excited about Curve. Anyways, let's continue then. So the way that you earn Curve is by becoming a liquidity provider in any one of the Curve pools. Say I have USD coin, I deposit that into one of the USD pools, and I start earning Curve right away, and it accrues on a gradual second by second basis. So that's great. There is a current utility that the token has that I think is really interesting, and there's also future utility that we can speculate about, and I'm going to try to, as best I can, separate those. So the current utility, the one thing that you can do with Curve now that is really interesting, you can take your Curve, you can lock it into a time-locked governance contract. And that time lock can be anywhere of your choosing, between 1 week and 4 years. And when it's locked, you have access to voting on the protocol. And the amount of voting that you can do is dependent on the quantity of Curve that you lock and the length of time that you are locking it for, which is kind of interesting. Hopefully I can have some time to dive into that a little later in this video. In addition to the voting, you get a boost to your Curve earning in your liquidity pool. So any liquidity you have that is working in any one of the liquidity pools, if your Curve tokens are locked in the governance contract, you will be earning more Curve than you normally would in that liquidity pool, up to 2.5x the amount of Curve. So that's what you would want Curve for right now. It's boosting your Curve earnings in the liquidity pool. Additional kind of speculative things that may arise in the future. You could have a situation where you have a new pool that's coming out, and the DAO wants to incentivize that pool, so it allocates more Curve earning to that particular pool. It's not really a value accrual mechanism, but it is kind of an interesting incentive mechanism to drive liquidity to certain pools. So there's that. Also, there is a concept of fee burning. So any fees that liquidity providers earn, the idea is that those fees could be used to repurchase Curve and then burn it, so reducing the supply based on the usage of the protocol and returning a value back to the investors. That's the idea of the fee burn. It's really it's speculative at this point, but it is speculative from the founder of Curve. So it is something that they are looking at seriously to implement in the future. But that would be something that would be controlled by the DAO later on in a vote. So best to put that in your bucket of like, okay, yeah, that's good to know that might be a possibility someday, but not to take the fee burn too seriously. Anyway, moving on. The Curve supply. So the inflation rate. I'm not particularly interested in this kind of stuff, but I think it's important to know about, so I'm going to include it here. So Curve supply inflation is really high, and it's going to continue being really high for quite some years. Part of that is because the founder and the investors and early users and employees, they all have a vesting period where their initial token locks are going to be slowly unvesting over the course of 1 to 4 years, depending on which category they fall in. So you can see the founder of Curve has a 4-year vesting period before all of their tokens are completely released, and this comes out to about 25 to 30% of the total token supply. I think it's closer to 25%. I think that's pretty cool. 30% of tokens going to shareholders, over 60% going to liquidity providers. I feel like that's pretty fair, like compared to some of the other crypto teams that have released tokens where they have, over 70% of the tokens allocated to themselves. 62% to liquidity providers feels like, yeah, I feel pretty good about that. And I will say I've been a member of the Curve Telegram for a number of months now. I like to do that to kind of get a handle on what the community's like, what the founding team's like, and what their goals are. And I felt like, the community and the team has a view of trying to create stability and prosperity for the whole DeFi ecosystem. I think they have a really sustainable perspective on things, and I think that comes out in something like this where they're actually delegating most of the supply to the people who are using the application. Granted, it'll take some time, 4 years or so, before the liquidity providers actually match the amount of tokens that have been released with the founding team and early investors. So it'll take some time for the Curve token to kind of disseminate through the many people. That's enough about the Curve supply. I don't really care all that much about it. Right. So just to hit on the really important thing about Curve, what do you do with Curve? You lock them up. And why do you want to lock them up? Well, it's because when you lock them up, then you get up to 2.5 times the curve boost on your supplied liquidity in the liquidity pool. And also, you get to exert influence on the governance process. I put that in kind of little text because I don't really think that that's a reward. I don't think that's the reason why you would do it. This may be a product of my own personal cynicism. Maybe it's a personal problem. I don't know. But I don't feel like people get involved with governance because they think like, oh yeah, I want to improve the protocol and I want to do my part to make the world a better place. You know, I don't think that's what motivates people. I think that most people are rational, self-interested actors. As callous as that might seem, I think people are looking out for their interest, and in this case, Curve gives them a personal interest. Your interest is, hey, you lock up your tokens here, you get boost to your Curve rewards, and you also get to vote. And I think that that dynamic um, isn't just paying people to vote, but it's keeping people inside of the Curve ecosystem. It's sort of building a governance moat around itself. Because imagine like what's really happening here. You decide, okay, I want to earn more Curve, so I'm going to lock up my Curve into the governance contract for 6 months. And then it's like, okay, well, I got to supply liquidity in order to keep getting this boosted Curve. So I'm going to keep earning more and more Curve. And then I'm going to use that Curve to continue, locking into the governance contract some more. And it's this sort of cycle that could create kind of a competition amongst liquidity providers to boost their their merit inside of the ecosystem. And the more invested you are financially in something, well, at some point, whether you like it or not, whether you want to or not, it's really important that if you're locked into a system, you should really take a vested personal interest as well as a financial interest. And so I think that what will end up happening is this Curve governance lock system will end up kind of tricking greedy people into becoming influential and responsible custodians of the application that everybody wants to use. This is what is really cool to me, because I think it's kind of funny, and I think it's kind of beautiful that you could trick people in this way, trick greedy people into being good. Yeah, that's kind of actually what made me really love Bitcoin when I first understood what Bitcoin was, because it's the same way, you give a block reward to the miners who are validating all these transactions and securing the network, maintaining the integrity of the network. So you're tricking the entire world to coordinate their efforts together to maintain a system and its security. It's just really amazing. That's all I'll say about that. So, just the mechanics of what's happening here when you're vote locking your tokens. So you say you have your Curve token. You got 100 Curve tokens, right? You're going to lock them in voting, and you're going to get something called, I misspoke in my last video. This is not vested Curve. This is called voting escrowed Curve token. And the amount of voting escrow Curve token you get is dependent on the quantity of Curve tokens you deposit and the time lock that you deposit them for, whether you deposit them for a month or 6 months or a year or whatever it is. The longer you lock them, the more V-Curve you get. And this kind of shows you how the curve to V-curve ratio changes. So more curve is more V-curve. Say you deposit 1,000 curve for a year. Oh, so this is, no, that's wrong. That's longer lock. Okay. All right. Bear with me here. This is supposed to say 2,000. So if you locked 1,000 curve for a year, you would get 250 V curve. If you locked 2,000 curve for 1 year, so same amount of time but twice as much curve, you would earn 500 V curve. So if you locked 1,000 curve for 4 years, you would get yourself 1,000 V curve. So that's kind of how the ratio changes. Okay, and it's the same thing for if you're locking more a longer lock. So one year with 1,000 curve is 250 V curve. Same amount of curve for 2 years is 500 V curve. So you can see the dynamic changing there. So this is where it kind of gets complicated. I'm not a mathematician, but I tried to kind of sit down and understand what's going on with this calculation. This is the calculation that shows how much boost you're getting to your curve accrual, and it's dependent on multiple factors. Some of them are going to increase your boost. Some of those factors are going to decrease your boost. So if more liquidity gets pumped into curve, all other things being equal, it would automatically increase your curve earning. And that would be because you have a higher proportion of the curve tokens locked in governance than other people who are supplying liquidity. And so the governance incentive mechanism is rewarding you for being a governance locked liquidity provider, and it's trying to incentivize other liquidity providers to also participate in the governance lock. A factor that decreases your boost is when the voting total increases. So that's when more liquidity providers start locking their tokens up in the Curve governance contract. So the more people who are locking them up, the lower those rewards get. So this could create kind of a dynamic where people start competing with each other to lock more and more Curve tokens so that they get a higher proportion of the available boost and influence inside of the governance process. Right. I don't know if I said this before. I probably should have said it at the beginning. Nothing that I say is or should be construed as financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, and I don't really know what I'm talking about, generally speaking. So, yeah, I don't think that needs to be said or elaborated on, but that's the deal there. So, the curve market dynamics that I think may play out is that I think that this is a self-contained ecosystem that Curve is creating. So I think that we'll see a lot of participation for these long-term liquidity providers who are planning to stay in the protocol for a long time, probably because they see that they get pretty good yield and they like that, and it seems reliable, and they believe in Curve long-term, so they're sticking around, and they choose to hold on to their Curve, and they want to lock it up in that governance contract so that they can amplify the Curve earnings that they get and also amplify their influence within the governance process. Right. So that's long-term LPs. So the other market participant that I can imagine being present are the speculators who are looking for these short-term hot commodities to farm and come into these protocols and earn yield. These are going to be the people who are earning Curve when the price goes up and they see that they can earn an attractive yield. They'll then quickly dump it back up onto the market. But the interesting thing with the way that this market dynamic is created is that speculators who are short-term farm and dumping, um, they're not going to be earning any boost, or if they are locking in the governance contract, it's not going to be for a significant amount of time, and it's not going to be competitive with the longer-term LPs. So inevitably, they're going to be forced to either become long-term LPs and become more invested in the protocol, or they're going to find other places to go because uh, this isn't really an ecosystem where they get the lion's share. That's not to say that this is an ecosystem that can do entirely without speculators and it's completely shutting them out. That's not saying that at all. It's just saying that that there are incentives in place that prioritizes long-term, highly invested liquidity providers over these farm and dump speculators. I don't think that Curve dislikes anybody in particular, and I don't think that they dislike um, people coming in and doing this kind of behavior where they're just kind of supplying liquidity for a short time. But I think that they understand that that sort of behavior is just short-term fluff. You know, it pumps up numbers and it looks really impressive when you've got $1 billion of locked funds in your protocol, but it's like, okay, well, next week all the speculators are going off to the next hot DeFi app. So it's not really creating sustainable or real long-term value. And I think it's okay. The speculators are going to do what they do, and that's great for them. Uh, but Curve is protecting its most important members, and that's what's important to Curve. So I guess I would say overall, my conclusion is that the Curve token is really a token by and for liquidity providers, the users of Curve. It's not really made for speculators on the open market at this point, or even external investors who aren't directly involved in the protocol. And I think that's because there isn't really there isn't any kind of like fee burning or profit sharing involved that's captured by the Curve token right now. It's possible that the governance could change that in the future. I don't want to jump the gun on saying how governance is going to proceed because it's still a couple weeks out before it even starts, and it's a bit early to really jump into what's going to happen with governance. I wouldn't be prepared to speak about that. But I guess I'd just say, hey, I'm really excited to see what happens. I'm excited to see how these crypto economic incentives play out. Yeah, that's really it. I hope you're excited, as excited as I am, and I guess we're gonna see what happens over the next couple of months. It's there's gonna be some big things that happen. So have a good one until next time.